And then this is the last example I'll give is Europeana, which I think some of you may know. It's the sort of cultural heritage sort of group in Europe. And they are museums and galleries and things trying to digitize and put a lot of their assets online. And what they have is they have a lot of repositories of public domain works, really, really ancient manuscripts and things like that. And there's been a discussion and some deliberation over if, especially in Europe, if you scan a public domain work like the Constitution, the person who scanned it has the copyright of the scan, right? And a lot of museums were asserting copyright over public domain works that they were digitizing. They wanted to get credit for it, which makes sense. And so there's this kind of problem because a lot of things that ought to be public domain ended up digitized but still not free. And so a group of people got together and they said, okay, well, let's try to promote museums making public domain things available under public domain. And so what we did was we used the same thing, which was a technical standard and a legal standard, and we have a network of lawyers and judges in 100 countries and MOUs with 62 jurisdictions, which is a really key part of Creative Commons. It's an international movement. And we created this, the C with a slash through it doesn't mean anti-copyright, by the way. It means that it's a symbol that means this work has no known copyrights. It basically means it's in the public domain. The logo was designed by the Wikipedia community. The interesting thing is Europeana was about to go off and create their own mark, and they agreed to adopt ours if we launched it. And so we've launched this. But this is slightly relevant because this is really about taking World Heritage content and trying to make it freely available online. The thing that we added, which is relevant to your community, I think, is we added another section called norms, which allows the museum to say, we know that we have no copyright on this, but we would like it if you would give us acknowledgement in this way, or that you didn't use it in this way. And what we're doing is we're using social norms to enforce a kind of behavior around the content, and we're using the technical process that we have to attach these norms to the content as it travels around the web. And we're working with the World Wide Web Consortium to build it into HTML, which is the standard for the web, so that all the software will understand it. So when you download an image from a website into Photoshop, eventually it should automatically give attribution to the museum that scanned it and thank them and do all that kind of thing. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to split away a little bit the legal stuff, because sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes you're trying to create a massive database of 1 million images and smash them together. You can't give every single museum attribution, but you can actually keep the metadata in there so that when the student downloads and puts it in the student project and film, that at the end of the film editing software, the credits pop up automatically. So that's what we're working on. And we'd love to talk to you guys about this more. Europeana was a big win for us. We're trying to work with the Americans as well. And I'm going to pivot back a little bit to this OpenStack. So the other effect of this thing is this stack makes everything cheaper, as I said, which makes innovation cheaper by making failure cheaper. And I'll explain that. Because first of all, it's enabled open source software. So if you think about Google, Google probably would, before the internet, would have cost millions of dollars, would have required a contract with every country that it connected to, would have taken 10 years, would have been run by the telephone company, wouldn't work. But in fact, it cost maybe $1,000 of hardware to put together. They connected to the Stanford computer network, and I was running a competitor at the time, InfoSeek. I was the chairman of Japan, and they just ate our lunch. But the thing that happens there is the cost of innovation is so low, the cost of failure is very low, and there's another thing that we call, this is just a keyword, I won't explain everything, but you should just keep this in mind, is that the method of developing software has changed to the point where right now, my small startup companies that I invest in, I can get to what we call a minimum viable product, which is a product that we can launch with users and see how it works in approximately 3 weeks for about $20,000 or $30,000. So in the old days, even in the Google days, it used to be that venture capitalists gave startups $1 million. Well, now my investment, when I make investments, I give them $50,000, $20,000 to see the product, and if it doesn't work, fine, try again. But the cost of failure has gotten so low. And if you look at every single really neat, not every single, but most innovations on the internet, the web itself, Wikipedia. Oh, let's make a encyclopedia that anyone can edit, and it'll be better than the Britannica. You know, would you give a grant to these guys? No, right? But the fact is, it didn't cost them anything to start it, and just, sure, go ahead. You know, and once it gets going, you know, they can fund themselves and they can take grants. But the idea is that a lot of these great things and innovations that we have are great in retrospect, but are very high risk when they start. The good news is it's very low cost, right? So the cost of failure is reduced, the cost of innovation is lower, the risk is higher. And my argument that I want to make is that the nature of risk, you have to kind of be aware of this, because in the traditional model, the costs were higher, and if you come from an operating company, you have all kinds of things that you could lose, but the upside is kind of capped. You have like limited growth based on the investment that you make. And so most of the people are focused on limiting downside. And this is same with investors, and I also think that probably grant people are also somewhat risk adverse. When you really want to be taking more risk, it's really difficult when you worry about the amount of money that you could lose and the possible damage. And this also creates a kind of environment where failure isn't tolerated very much. And what you forget, though, is that now the cost of failure is much lower. So as a venture capitalist, this is how we look at things, right? So each investment, a $50,000 investment, the most you're going to lose is the money you put in. And what you do is, if you look at it, is that there are always like 1 in 100 companies will do okay. If you look at Sequoia's portfolio when Google went out, that one Google return was more than every other company in the portfolio. You take Google out, the second biggest one, I don't remember what it was, but was bigger than everything else, right? And so there's this power law that looks like that. And what you do is, as a venture capitalist, is you bet on lots of things, and you find those ones that are really successful and make sure that they get all the support that they need to go. The guys that aren't doing very well, or the girls, you just tell them, okay, no problem, we like the way you executed, come up with another idea, just scrap what you did. And the other important thing about pivoting, this is what we call it, pivoting, is that you have to be able to write 1 million lines of code and say, you know what, no, we're going to go that way. And every week you have to have a product meeting, be ready to move. So PayPal was a mobile encryption company when it started out. YouTube was a video dating site. You know, nobody ends up where they started. And that's another really interesting thing, is that a lot of times funders have this kind of trajectory. You're in my program, you're going this way, we want you to look like this, and here's the outcome that we want. But what's really important about a lot of innovation, at least in the venture space, is you give them the freedom to innovate and the freedom to pivot. And the really good investors, the ones that I like to co-invest with, are the people who are kind of along for the ride. And in John Seely Brown's book, I'm not promoting it because I'm in the book, but it's a great book. But he talks about having a general trajectory of where you want to go, and then sort of moving along and embracing serendipity. And instead of stocking all the stuff and having central control, you pull the network and the resources together as you need it. And he says focusing on embracing serendipity. And I think that's what a lot of it is about. There's a certain timing with a certain combination of people, a certain dinner table that you're at, a certain lunch table that you're at. And if you plan everything and mitigate every risk, you can't have serendipity by default. So the more you plan, the less lucky you are, is another way of saying it. And the more money you spend and the more risk adverse you are, the more you're going to plan. And the more centrally governed you are, the less likely you're going to have innovation on the edges. And so I think a lot of this is about lowering the cost of failure, allowing innovation on the edges, embracing serendipity, and don't look at it as noise. Look at that as signal, is a really key thing that we do in the venture space, which may or may not have some application in your side. So I'll finish by, this is a great book that I recently just started, but it's a participatory museum, and it's talking about opening up museums and pulling people in. And I think that, you know, the idea about opening up certain rights, so you don't have to give everything away, but maybe give the non-commercial rights away, maybe give the low-resolution rights away, but having people blogging about your museum, having people blogging about your film, having people editing your trailer, those are all things that allow people to participate. And the young people today expect to be allowed to participate. They're not passive anymore. And they want to modify the way they see things. They have their own user interface. And creating museums, creating art, creating film that allows participation technically, legally, and just, you know, emotionally is really, I think, important. I think this is kind of a great way for the venture community also to connect with the arts community, because still continuously my best startups are coming from the arts world. And the New York venture scene is just, Kickstarter is one company that I've invested in. It could have been a for-profit, it could have been a non-profit. It's a great engine for new startups coming up. It's a great engine for artists coming up. And I think that, working together is going to be really important more than ever. And so I look forward to any collaborations we can do. Thank you very much.